People today cling to gleaming devices, to sensors that inspect every grain of soil as if truth were contained in a blinking number. Yet what leaves historians stunned lies deep beneath the ancient mud of the Middle Ages, where the humble gardens of monasteries kept quietly thriving even more vigorously than modern fields fed by chemicals and machines. Their soil restored itself season after season, as though beneath that darkness there existed a hidden pulse, a memory we have lost amid the groaning of metal and the ambition for higher yields. In old manuscripts stained the color of aged honey, the monks recorded their sowing seasons with the stillness of those who listened to the underground veins of the earth, needing no measurement, no formula, only patience and an understanding etched into the bone over countless generations. And this very contrast. On one side, a world of conveniences slowly eroding its own ability to perceive. On the other, people with nothing but rough hands, who nevertheless nurtured crops that outlast time, strikes us like a cold bell ringing from an ancient stone tower, forcing us to ask whether we truly know how to nourish the soil or are merely winning a race built on illusion. If you feel that something has been buried for far too long, a faint tremor like the earth softly calling, hold on to that intuition. Sometimes a single small question can open a door that later generations have not dared to touch for centuries. In the quiet gardens hidden behind the moss-covered stone walls of ancient monasteries, there exists a treasury of knowledge that modern people pass by as if it were nothing more than a trivial relic of the past. Yet the deeper we read into those yellowed manuscripts, the more we sense that something is not quite normal. A layer of knowledge recorded with such meticulousness, it borders on obsession, then suddenly vanishing from the official flow of history as though someone had gently erased the most important parts. The monks described how the soil self-restored, and how plants conversed with one another not as metaphors, but as natural laws so obvious they required no explanation. They recorded by the cycles of the moon, by moisture, by the slow movements of shadow. And though centuries have passed, the yields from those gardens still surpass many modern farms, a truth that should have been celebrated, yet instead has been pushed to the margins of research as something of little value. Why is it that a cultivation system that operated perfectly for hundreds of years is so rarely mentioned? Why are the most detailed pages precisely the ones missing or cut short? If you feel that something is amiss in this long silence of history, hold tight to that intuition. Sometimes the things spoken of the least are the very ones that completely change how we see the world. In the pile of rubble that collapsed from the ancient vault of Fécamp Abbey, the monks found a record that made even the most steadfast scholars take a step back, a piece of parchment edged in red, like an old warning mark bearing the words, "Do not alter the forbidden order, for the earth remembers." What seemed like a metaphor suddenly became an icy slap when archaeologists took samples of the ancient soil and discovered something that has never appeared in any modern agricultural textbook. After hundreds of years of continuous cultivation, the microbial structure of the soil remained so intact that it was nearly identical to that of untouched primordial forest soil. This is not merely a paradox, it is a breach in the understanding of an entire era. How could monks with crude tools maintain something that modern science can only partially replicate through high technology, sterile laboratories, and enormous budgets? And here is the twist that led many researchers to request a halt to publication. The microorganisms beneath that soil were not merely sustainable, they were self-organizing, adjusting their density in cyclical patterns exactly as the ancient records described. Which means those dust-covered lines of text from centuries past were not superstition, but precise descriptions of a living system we no longer understand. Stranger still, several key records relating to the Forbidden Order have disappeared from the archives, cut off or reduced to fragments, forcing one to wonder, did someone intentionally conceal this knowledge when the era began to change? If you feel a shiver run down your spine when thinking about the phrase, "The Earth remembers," keep that small thought. Sometimes questions born from doubt open the very doors that history has tried to lock away for a very long time. In the scattered descriptions from the monastery of St. Gall, the garden was not seen as a collection of planting beds, but as a living organism with reactions so subtle that they make modern scientists frown. When one type of plant weakened, the plant beside it seemed to adjust its growth to compensate. When the weather shifted in tone, the band of herbs along the garden's edge curled inward, as if drawing a protective circle. And when the soil began to tire, the entire root system in an area slowed its rhythm all at once, as though receiving a shared signal. No one could explain. What is most perplexing is this. These reactions align perfectly with the model of a self-regulating biological network, a concept modern science has only been able to replicate in crude form within studies of intelligent ecosystems. So how could a group of monks without microscopes, without chemistry, without any measuring instruments, describe phenomena whose mechanisms we still debate today? They said the garden listened and responded, as if a faint consciousness flowed through each grain of soil and each vein of leaf. It sounds poetic, but 21st century comparative reports force us to seriously consider the possibility that this system truly operated through a kind of ecological intelligence that we lost because we trusted machines too much. If the thought that a medieval garden might understand more than we assume gives you a slight, thrilling shiver, try recording that feeling. Sometimes a sudden question is the first step toward touching what no one has been able to decipher for 1,000 years. In the ancient records of the northern monasteries, one finds a detail often overlooked because it is mistaken for decoration. Rows of fragrant plants placed around the garden's edge. Lavender, basil, rosemary, standing at the boundary like scented sentinels. But when modern botanists reconstructed this model, what they discovered left the entire group speechless. The soil temperature inside the ring of these sentinel plants was 1 to 2 degrees higher than the area outside, enough to protect the roots during skin-cutting cold nights. In other words, the monks had unintentionally created a kind of biological greenhouse in the 11th century, something modern agriculture replicates only through plastic film, heating systems, and climate sensors, and still cannot match the natural self-regulation of these ancient gardens. The twist is this. These plants did more than retain warmth. When planted in the exact perimeter described in the manuscripts, they formed a scent barrier that disrupted the pheromone-based navigation of insects, reducing destructive activity by 60–70%. A dual defense, heat and scent, operating flawlessly without a scrap of metal or a drop of chemical. And yet, strangely, very few modern documents mention this peculiar structure, as though the knowledge were pushed aside because It is too simple to be considered advanced science. If that makes you chuckle and shiver at the same time, leave the thought as it is. Sometimes what works too well is exactly what people hesitate to acknowledge. In the remaining records from Canterbury, there's a passage that seems trivial at first, but grows increasingly chilling. The more one reads it, the monks did not use measuring rods, did not need scales, and did not have any tool for testing soil quality. Instead, they smelled. They bent down, pressed 2 fingers into the damp earth, lifted a small handful, and brought it close to their nose as though listening to the whisper of an invisible being. To them, healthy soil had a scent that was warm and round. Tired soil was quiet and faint, and damaged soil carried a hint of metallic sharpness, almost impossible to detect unless one had lived a lifetime with the seasons. What is remarkable is that these notes align uncannily with modern microbiological analysis. Low-activity soil truly loses its smell. Bacteria-rich soil has a light organic aroma, and mineral-heavy or diseased soil indeed presents a strange layer of scent only specialists can identify. But the most unsettling part for the scientific community is a small, very old, marginal comment written beneath the passage. When the earth has no fragrance left, let it sleep as the elderly must rest. Not poetry, not philosophy. This was a rule for soil recovery that even today's agricultural AI models still cannot accurately replicate. And the final twist, which you may already sense, many field studies show that pH meters, microbial sensors, and organic matter detectors can deviate by 20 to 30% in cold, humid conditions, while a single monk only had to bend down and smell once. If this makes you both laugh at its simplicity and shiver at its uncanny precision, you may leave a small thought behind. Who knows? Your intuition may be brushing against something science is still struggling to explain. In a 12th century manuscript found in a wall recess of Worcester Abbey, the monks described a phenomenon that at first sounds like superstition. The nights when the earth changes its breathing. They claimed there were moments of absolute silence, lasting only a few hours, when the soil was rearranging life within itself. And during that period, no one was allowed to touch the garden, not to till, not to step across it, not even to light a lamp near the edge of the beds. To them, it was the sacred hour of the earth. To modern people, it was a fantastical tale. But then, 21st century microbiological measurements happened to record fluctuations in temperature, moisture, enzyme activity, occurring exactly within the window described in the manuscript, as though the soil were truly adjusting itself according to a secret biological rhythm. More striking still, in the same manuscript appears a line written in rare blue ink, reserved only for matters of utmost importance. He who breaks this moment of silence shall harvest a season he will not understand. It sounds like a threat, yet when cross-referenced with modern experimental data, many researchers have had to admit, cultivating at the wrong moment during the microbial rhythm shift can severely reduce yield for reasons that remain unclear. And so the question cuts into us like night wind slipping through ancient stone arches. How did the monks, with no tools and no scientific knowledge, know the precise moment when the earth entered its cycle of renewal? If this feeling sends a shiver through you, leave a thought behind. Sometimes the things we call myths are simply science that arrived a few thousand years too early. In an ancient manuscript darkened by candle smoke, the monks called legume plants the drops of blood that nourish the soul of the earth. A metaphor that sounds poetic, yet strikes directly at the heart of what modern science has only begun to fully understand in the past few decades. When research groups reconstructed the monastery's crop rotation model, the results left many agronomists silent for a long moment. The microbial density in beds planted with legumes recovered twice as fast, even 3 times faster, than in areas without them. An internal report records that one seasoned professor blurted out, "If these numbers are correct, then we've overlooked the greatest secret of agriculture." And here comes the part that creates a difficult conflict. This technique, simple, effective, nearly free, existed for centuries, yet somehow vanished from large-scale farming when industrialization swept in. Why? Who decided that the soil did not need rest? Who declared that legumes were merely cheap food? If you feel this is too unbelievable, yet carries a chilling scent of truth, just jot down a thought. Sometimes the smallest questions reveal the gaps that history has been trying to hide for hundreds of years. There is a detail in medieval agricultural manuscripts that many readers skim past. Yet if one pays close attention, it carries more weight than an entire philosophical lecture. The monks called the tiny insects dung beetles, earthworms, decay beetles, the silent knights of the soil, warriors without armor who nonetheless carried the harvest on their tiny shoulders. They believed that when these knights were healthy, the soil breathed steadily. When they vanished, the soil would lose its voice, even grow angry. It sounds like excessive personification, but what makes modern biologists swallow hard is the data. The strongest soil recovery models are precisely those where the insect systems in the upper layer are dense and active, forming a metabolic network that even advanced agricultural technologies have yet to fully replicate. And then the twist appears, not from an ancient manuscript, but from a recent research report. When comparing 2 gardens under identical conditions, the area using mechanical tools showed the density of the knights drop by nearly half, dragging soil vitality down with it. Meanwhile, the hand-tended monastic-style model maintained a nearly perfect microbial balance. In other words, while we chase after machinery, our ancestors already knew what we have inadvertently forgotten. If we want the earth to feed us, we must let the earth have its allies. So if this story makes you glance down at the soil beneath your feet with a slightly different gaze, leave a small thought behind. Perhaps that perspective will open up something we are once again on the verge of forgetting. And if you want to continue exploring the ancient knowledge that modern science is only just beginning to catch up with, you might consider subscribing, because what comes next may surprise you even more.